start with you,
We'll be
Alexis.
recording, so y'all can count us in, and we'll start with dinner.
Because I feel like you have the story that's most connected to the events of the day and what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was on a plane, and how that came to be is I was a flight attendant for American Airlines. On the 10th of September, I got sent to do a Dallas turn. That means I fly to Dallas just so I can work a trip home. Well, there was a lot of weather in New York on the 10th, so my plane took off late. I ended up spending the night in Dallas, which I think is probably a good thing. So the next morning was my day off. The 11th was my day off, so I was anxious to get home to New York. So I got up early and got dressed, went straight to the airport in Dallas. Nothing had happened yet, but while I was there, all the screens in the airport showing a plane had gone into the World Trade Center, and I think everybody kind of assumed it was one of those little private planes that are always kind of zipping around the buildings.
And an accident, perhaps.
Thought it was an oops.
Yeah.
A deadly oops. But I don't think anybody thought it was a commercial airline at that point. Certainly not anyone at the airport, because everything was business as usual. Anyway, so I go check in. I get on the plane early, and I'm making myself nice and comfortable before all the passengers come on. They're boarding too. Still, nobody's really talking about anything. There was really no inclination or showing that this has happened. So we take off. This is maybe, I don't know, 7:30, between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning. We take off, and we immediately take a right-hand turn and then start to descend again. And I thought it was a mechanical issue. As a flight attendant, that's not unusual.
Sure.
But usually it's a mechanical issue of some
sort. So
sort.
this is 7:30 Dallas time.
Ish.
Ish.
Ish. Like I remember getting to the airport right around 7:30, something like that. And nothing had really transpired to make it seem like this was an attack at that point.
And the fact that you actually got on the plane.
We were boarding. I mean, everything was operating as normal. People were coming and going. The only thing I noticed that was different is like, why are they showing the hole in the World Trade Center? Because typically at an airport, you don't see any kind of plane crashes because there's nervous flyers. So you just typically don't see that. And for some reason, it was on every screen. And I was like, that is weird, but that's the only thing that was weird. While we're on our way down, we're landing, and I hear another flight attendant say to me, she just looked at me and said, it was one of ours.
Oh.
And I immediately,
one of your company's planes.
one of our airplanes.
Yeah.
And I immediately went into denial. No, our pilots wouldn't do that.
Yes.
And we landed. Everybody kind of got off without incident. All the passengers were pretty quiet. They weren't told anything, I think. And once I got off the plane, I ran off the jet bridge to the gate agent. And I said, was that one of our planes? She said, I think so. And I said, who was on the crew? I immediately wanted to know if one of my friends, if I knew anybody on board. So I didn't know anybody on board, and I didn't know that yet though. She just started to type in like to find out who was on the crew list, and her screen went dead.
Oh.
Yeah, and then I hear another flight attendant say, another plane hit. And I didn't know what to think at that point. All the screens went dead. She said, I don't think anyone's going anywhere. I don't think you're getting home today.
But you had landed.
Yeah.
Where?
In Dallas.
Back in Dallas.
Yeah,
Okay.
we took off, landed right back in Dallas, and that's when I started to find out what had actually happened.
So second plane hit, screens are dead. What's going on in the airport?
Nothing right now. Everything was still pretty normal. I don't think the passengers and people just moving toward the gate, and like people in the airport, I don't think they knew quite yet. I was hearing all these words and whispers from other flight attendants.
Well, if they weren't watching, then they would not have known.
Correct. They were trying to get to their flight.
Right.
They were trying to get to their gate. They were doing the airport stuff that you do.
business
You're
as
not
usual.
you're not looking at news.
Yeah.
Right.
So I was just getting these whispers and, kind of like almost in a gossip situation from other flight attendants, and they all turned out to be true.
Yeah.
But at first, it was just very confusing.
Do you remember the moment when it hit for all of you, and when you saw it hit in the airport for passengers, that, oh, this is an attack?
So after her screens went dead, meaning her screen, she couldn't pull up information. She couldn't pull up flight information, nothing. I went straight up to what we call the crew lounge. It's a gate C21 at the Dallas airport. It's like filled with flight attendants and pilots. It's where everyone goes to smoke and be casual, right? So when I got up there, there weren't that many people up there yet. there was one little TV screen, and we're watching it, and at that point you could see that both planes had been hit. And at that point, I think we all started to kind of ask each other, but quietly, like, or thinking, you know, are we under attack? It was just sort of that, at first it was just we thought it was a commercial plane, and then after the second one hit, I think everyone started to ask themselves, are we under attack? But we didn't know, but it started to come into your mind. Yeah. That room started to fill up because all these planes were landing, because of course aircraft was now grounded.
So I wanted to bring that up because that for me is the thing that sticks out. One of the things that sticks out the most is I had never seen them take all of the planes out of the sky.
Right.
That was like, oh, this is a big, big deal. So for a flight attendant to see that happen.
It was weird.
Yeah.
I mean, just bizarre. Isn't something I'd ever thought I'd see. So as that happens, planes are landing, none are taking off. So the airport's just filling up with people. And now people outside are understanding what's happening. And because they're all stranded now, you know. So that means all the rental cars went real quick. And a lot of people are just now stranded where they are, including flight attendants and pilots.
And I would imagine at this point, if people are watching their screens in the airport, panic sets in.
Yeah.
I wasn't out in the airport during that time. I was up in that room. So I was just surrounded by American Airlines flight crew. So it was just all us. And I think a lot of us at that point, I mean, I don't mean to sound selfish. I was thinking very much of my airline family and thinking about what they just went through and their family. I didn't even think about my own family who was desperately looking for me at that time. It hadn't occurred to me that they might be worried.
That you were on one of the flights, the plane. How long did it take you to get in touch with loved ones?
I called my mom from that room. She immediately started crying. So what had happened, we're watching the TV and we're all just trying to figure out stuff at the same time. A gate agent runs in and says something like, a plane hit the Pentagon. And now our heads are all kind of spinning. Like, we don't know what's going on. There's a lot of chatter, you know, but we kind of realize, okay, we're being attacked and we don't know what to do or what's happening right now. Somebody said to me, do you need to call someone? And I was like, yeah. So I called my mom. She just said thank you and started crying. And then I'm watching the TV and the first building slowly falls down with that puff of smoke coming up around it. And all I could think of that point, because see, I lived 3 blocks from the World Trade Center. So at that point, I stopped thinking about my airline family and I'm thinking about my fiance and my cats in my house. And I'm thinking there's no way. They're not gonna, they can't survive this. So I thought I was watching everything I love be destroyed. So at first I was very selfish of me. I was thinking of the airline people and my family and my loss and, you know, fearing for myself, really.
That's natural. That's
Very
natural.
It took me probably 4 hours to realize there were 3,000 people in that building.
Because
You know?
that's something you can just not wrap your mind around.
No, it
Still
was,
to today, I can't wrap my mind
That's
around
so many
the fact
people.
that happened.
But that's a natural reaction for you
Yes.
because you lived so close and you had loved ones so close. So of course you were thinking about it.
I thought about myself. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did for a while. It took me till later that evening until I realized, you know, people.
Took you how long to get in touch with your fiance?
Hours. Because he had typically caught his ride at the bottom of the World Trade Center. That day he had gotten picked up already and was gone. So he was safe, but our cell phone tower was at the top of, I guess, Tower 1. So that was gone. So I just couldn't get a hold of him for the longest time. I think a lot of people in New York were having problems communicating, which just added to more of the fear and the panic for anyone who lived downtown. I mean, everyone downtown was just sort of incommunicado, you know, immediately. People were using phone booths, for goodness sakes.
When did you have, I remember phone booths in New York, using phone booths. When did you have, or did you have the thought that was, okay, this may not be the career for me?
No.
You didn't have that?
No, I got furloughed afterward,
Yeah.
and I was fine with it. You know, I didn't have a problem with that, but no, it never was
It
like a
didn't
career.
scare you
No, I
out of
didn't.
it? Yeah.
No, it didn't scare me out of it, but I was okay that I got furloughed. You know, I was fine with that. So I'll tell you about what happened after I got home, but first I want to hear where you were.
I was still in college toward the end of it. And so I had been, as college students do, out the night before. And I woke up kind of late in the morning and I logged on to AOL. Remember AOL and dial-up?
Right.
So I log on and there's the little screen that has the news and, you know, the stock, and you can check your email. And I see the little image of one of the towers with smoke coming out of it. I don't remember what the headline was, but I remember thinking, oh, this is clearly probably one of those if this were to happen. I thought, oh, they're talking about, like, you know, we're prepared, we would do this if something like this were to happen.
You thought it was like a mock
I thought it was like a
situation.
mock situation. Wow. And I clicked on the article, really, and that's all I thought it was. And I'm reading the article, I'm like, no, this is not reading like a mock situation. This is happening now. So I went and turned on the television, and there it was on every single station.
Like at what point, what was happening when you turned on the TV?
By that point, I believe that the second plane had already hit. And so all of the networks were now switching to, this is an attack. And so, you know, I'm glued to, and at that time we were an ABC household, so I'm glued to Peter Jennings. I'm watching him shift to being concerned about his daughter. Remember that? He was telling the producers he had a phone next to him on the set because he needed to know where his daughter was. She was in New York City. And I'm looking at this play out and watching the people jump off of the towers. And I will never forget those images. And I could get choked up about it now, because you think about that choice between, do I stay up here and potentially burn to death?
Right.
Or do I just jump and, you know,
Pray for the best.
pray for the best?
Yeah.
And so I sat there and I watched that. My family was home. It was my aunt's birthday. And so we had planned to go to my grandmother's house. She worked for the federal government. And so they evacuated her building, was one of the first in the city. They evacuated all of the skyscrapers in Kansas City. I was living in Kansas City. And so she went to my grandmother's house. We all went there, we got a cake, and we did what we could, but it was somber. And I remember spending hours trying to get in touch with friends who I knew were probably in New York because they were like bi-coastal, and then friends who lived in Boston because that's where one of the flights had originated. And you couldn't get in touch with anyone. I mean, it was busy signal, it was dead air, and so I finally was able to get in touch with a friend who lived in California, who had gotten in touch with a friend who lived in New York, and she was okay. And then hours later, I was able to get in touch with my two friends who lived in Boston, and they were fine, but that city was locked down, and it was just crazy. And then I got, and I can't remember, you know, we didn't have cell phones, smartphones back then.
Right, flip phones.
Yeah, we had flip phones. I can't remember how I got the notice. It may have been through email. It was from a professor, one of my journalism professors. And he had been, you know, a correspondent all over the world in war zones and all of that. And he said, look, the university is shut down, but I have a lecture hall. Anyone who wants to come by, we're gonna have the coverage on, and you can come on in. So we went in, and it was a handful of us. And he has it up on the screen, and he said, now I want you to look at what you're seeing here. And I want you to look at the journalists who are out here reporting, covered in the soot and the dust. He said, this is the job. He said, this is what you will be running toward. He said, look at it. The camera angles that you're getting, these are journalists who ran toward the worst thing we've seen on American soil in maybe ever. And he said, and if you are not willing to run toward that kind of danger and destruction and devastation, you might want to think about doing something else for a living. And I'll never forget it. I know people who were in my, class, my cohort at that college who didn't go into journalism because of that.
Wow.
And look, I've gone into some situations in this career that I wouldn't tell my mom about, that I went running toward. Nothing like that.
Right.
But that was a great lesson out of this tragedy. He gave us a great lesson out of that.
And I think for journalists, it is kind of an instinct.
Yes.
You see something, you either want to document it, or you want to document it.
Or you want to document it.
As a journalist, that is kind of what you do. But the natural, normal, healthy thing to do is save yourself.
Save yourself. But these journalists that day, and look, some of them have gone on to have careers that, are questionable. But I respect them because I watched them on that day run toward potentially their death.
That's right.
To cover the story.
They're not just journalists. So many people.
Oh my gosh. First responders.
First responders.
Just everyday
people living on the streets.
Yes.
Just New Yorkers running towards danger, not knowing.
To try and help.
To try to help.
Not knowing what could happen. So that's, I was able to get in touch with friends. We had some sort of a celebration for my aunt, who every year now on her birthday is tied to the anniversary of this tragedy. And I learned one of the greatest lessons in journalism I think I could have ever learned, and it did not deter me from wanting to do this for a living.
Same.
You were in the business already.
I was in the business.
Yeah.
I was a young producer. And when I say green, I mean, I was producing a morning show at that time in Birmingham, Alabama. And it was my first job.
Oh.
And I was nervous already doing this job that I really didn't quite understand.
Because producing's a lot.
Producing is a lot, especially because I was producing a morning show. It was 4 hours. It was just me.
And you have imposter syndrome at the beginning of your career. Like, can I do this?
Can I do this? Am I a great writer? What am I doing here? But on that day, as fate would have it, I was not only producing my 4-hour morning show in Birmingham, Alabama, I had to produce the noon show that day. And I said, normally that I would not be producing the noon show. Someone was out, so I picked up the noon show that day. And so I said, okay, well, I'm gonna take a little break. My morning show ended at 7, so I took a little break. So I'm driving to, I don't know, wherever I got something to eat.
Yeah.
On my way back, I'm listening to the radio. And the announcer kept saying, breaking news out of New York City, breaking news, breaking news. And I'm like, all I want to do is listen to my Michael Jackson on my way back to work,
Decompress.
Decompress, because I have to do this show that I've never done before. I turned it to another radio station, same thing. I'm like, what is happening here? So I'm listening, and what I'm hearing does not register in my brain that what they're saying is happening actually happened.
Because you were listening for Michael Jackson.
Because I'm just trying to listen to Thriller.
And get through your day.
And get through this next show.
Yeah.
Right? But when I stepped in that newsroom, and I'm shaking right now just thinking about it. Since we've been talking, my legs have been shaking.
Yeah.
Because it takes me back to a time that it pains me to remember it. Because you just never think in your lifetime that something like this, something so terrible, so many lives lost, you would never think that something like this could happen to us.
Oh, I was sure it wouldn't. I was convinced.
It's something you could never dream up.
Soil.
I was convinced no country would ever have the nerve.
This happens somewhere else.
Yes.
Not have the nerve.
This
Not the
happens somewhere
nerve.
else. It doesn't happen here.
Right.
It doesn't happen to us.
Right.
And it changed everything about our lives forever.
And it took away permanently the sense of security that we had, the assuredness that, oh, we're here and
We lost some innocence that day.
we lost it.
We did. And for a long time, I did not step on a plane. And even now, I think about it twice. I wasn't a flyer before. I definitely wasn't trying to fly after that for a long time. It took me 2 years to get back on a plane because you just never know. With all the safety protocols in place, you'd never know. Remember shampoos? You couldn't pack your shampoos anymore?
No liquids.
You know?
Yeah, none.
That was so different for us when we just throw anything in a bag and get on the plane.
We still have to take off our shoes.
We still have
Yes,
to take
you
our
still have
shoes
to
and
take
our
off your
belts.
shoes.
We used to show up at the airport and just get on the plane.
Just get on the plane.
Your family could come back
All
to the
the way
gate
to the
with you.
gate with
That's
you.
right.
Yes. Yeah, and everything changed. I remember it took me a while to fly again, too. And I was never afraid of flying. I've been flying since I was like a toddler.
Right.
And it took me a while, it was maybe a couple years before I did it, and going through the procedure of getting on, and you're like, oh, this is very different. This is.
I wasn't afraid of flying after that. I don't know why. That didn't bother me. I became very afraid of terrorists. So I have to say, for me personally, that day was horrible. Living at ground zero for the aftermath was brutal.
I can't imagine.
It was just brutal. So I had, we couldn't fly home, obviously, so we were literally stranded. There were no rental cars because everyone had taken them and gone. So it took me a couple days to secure a rental car. 2 other flight attendants and I kind of hopped in it together. They were going to Baltimore. I was going to New York. So we all drove throughout the night in our crumpled uniform and just like kind of, you know, in that mode, discussing it. We couldn't sleep. And we come to New York. We get to New York. The southern half of, the southern third of New York is just shut down. Like everything, you couldn't go down past Union Square. So I come over the George Washington Bridge, which is fairly north on the island, but you could see the towers. So the towers were my point of reference, everyone in New York's point of reference. So if you came up from a subway and needed to know where's north, you know, you just find the towers and then you could find your sense of direction. So I looked down toward the southern end of New York, and the towers are obviously not there, but all you could see was smoke in the place of the towers, this moving smoke, and it felt like an amputation, and that smoke was almost like the blood bleeding from the amputation. It was just like, felt like this missing digit part of you was just gone. So I stayed in the Gramercy Park area, which is in like the 20s or 30s. For about a week. They didn't let any residents come down to that area for about 6 days. Finally, they let residents come home, only residents. It was a military zone when I got there. All Army and National Guard. And at this point, it's still a recovery mission. So they're actively looking for people at this point. And it was on fire still. It burned for 3 months. They couldn't put the fire out because the damage was about 4 acres wide and about 6 stories deep and about 3 stories high. And the fire, they couldn't get to the fires. They couldn't get the water to the fire, so it never went out. The first week was pretty tough. I get back to my apartment, and there was about, we had left our windows open. It had been a beautiful September day, and all that cement dust had come in and filled up our whole apartment. So I had dust in my shoes in the closet, and my closet doors had been closed. It filled up the room. My doorman told me the sky went black. He was standing at the door when it happened. And when everyone started running past, he said he grabbed a couple people and pulled them in our lobby and then shut the door behind him. And he said it just went like it was the dead of night. He said it was like that for a while. Like it wasn't just a few seconds, it was a while. So my apartment had received all the smoke, and it got in like all my furniture, all my clothes, and in the walls, even the pores of the walls. So the smell never went away. We had debris on our windowsill, so there was like half of a shoe, a stapler, parts of an office phone, and there was fragments, parts, halfway burnt pieces of financial documents everywhere, all over downtown. And at that point, you know, they were still looking for bodies, so no one had cleaned up anything. It wasn't about a cleanup right now, so there was inches of dust on top of every doorway and awning. There were hundreds of cars blown out, including emergency vehicles. Those cars were left there for months because their owners never came to get them. There was a plain wheel at the end of my street. It was all very surreal, especially having to sort of contemplate that my workplace had crashed into my neighborhood. At first, it was just I tried to stay home. I didn't want to go out and get cat food or laundry or anything because going outside was a big reminder. If I stayed inside, maybe I could forget a little bit. But, you know, we're watching the news, watching CNN all the time.
There's no forgetting.
And the helicopters that were showing the footage were outside my window.
Wow.
So I could look at the helicopter and then look at the footage that it's showing. And let me just tell you, even though you could see, like the images you see are this widespread damage, looking at that was kind of like looking at it through a straw because the damage was actually so much bigger than you could capture on camera or describe. So the first 2 weeks was pretty somber and lonely. It was just us and the military down there. No one was coming down yet. After about 2 weeks, we started to see the people looking for their family members. So we weren't seeing tourists or looky-loos. We had people coming down with pictures of their loved ones taped on their T-shirt, with flyers in their hands, and this desperate look on their face. They would look at you like, have you seen them? Yeah. And, you know, you didn't know what to do because you kind of understood in your head where their loved one was, and yet they were holding on. And you felt bad for them because they hadn't accepted. You could tell they hadn't accepted what had happened.
They were just clinging to hope.
They're clinging to hope. They are clinging to hope. I mean, they're not letting go. But in the back of your head, you kind of know what's going on. So there was a lot of emotion. And I think none of us really knew what to do with it.
You still have a lot of emotion in your voice, your demeanor, you doing this with the chair. That's all still in there.
It is. It was rough.
How can it not be if you see something like that? You know, you're not just watching this on TV unfold. You're seeing this in person, up close.
I'm seeing the people who are looking for, okay, imagine, you know, they're going home at night. Like my house was bad enough, right? I was sauteing garlic trying to get rid of the smell. Like I scrubbed my walls. But I didn't have to go home and look at the dirty laundry of somebody who wasn't coming home. I didn't have to see their leftovers in the refrigerator. And these people were looking for their people. And there were no answers yet. You know, there were just no answers at that point. So that was a bad week too, that second week. After the third week, people started coming down, New Yorkers, just to kind of check it out, you know, look at ground zero. I remember at first, the police officers who were kind of, you know, keeping everybody from going past a certain point where they didn't let anybody take pictures at first. Finally, they gave up because people were going to take pictures. Another thing that stuck out to me was the helpers. Remember how Mr. Rogers said, always look for the helpers?
Look for the helpers.
I found out what he meant that day. People came, people took whatever profession they had, and they brought it to ground zero. I saw a little group of old ladies knitting booties for the canines because the dogs that they were using had to step on metal. Like I said, the fire is burning underneath. These dogs, their paws were burning. So there was a group of old ladies knitting booties, and I thought, how do these people think so fast about how to help? The doctors were there just checking people's eyeballs. There were people bringing food. There was a woman going around collecting laundry. I eventually did some laundry in my building just because I didn't know what else to do, you know? So I would do firemen's laundry.
So you're in the middle of like immense sadness, tragedy, but also then seeing the best of people.
Let me tell you, I am so glad to have been in New York City after that event, because I got to see America at its finest. And I might not have believed it if somebody just told me about it, but I saw everyone come together. Here's a story. So one day, so when George Bush comes, President Bush comes to stand on the pile, and we will not forget, and soon they will all know, right? He's giving his bullhorn speech. And we're all in shock, kind of, right? There was a guy behind me crying his eyes out and cursing bin Laden's name. I cannot tell you the things he was saying about bin Laden. I turned around. This is an absolute a Pakistani man. He was either from Pakistan or Afghanistan. He was definitely Muslim, but I didn't get a Saudi vibe from him. I felt like he was from Pakistan, and he was mad, and he loved our country. I was standing next to somebody who was loving our country as hard as anybody can, anybody born here. You know, he was more upset than I was. He was crying and cussing, and when I saw how much he loved this country, and then you turn around and you just see everyone coming together. And New York's got 80 different languages, okay? And it's like you just get used to, you're in a melting pot, you know?
It just shows you during those types of times in this country, in our history, the resiliency of not just Americans, you know, but people from all walks of life coming together.
To live what this is, to live what America is, you got to see it up close because, you know, we all know this, in the immediate months, years after that, brown people who looked like the man who was cussing bin Laden faced a lot of prejudice and
especially when they
a lot of grief.
attempted to get on a flight.
To get on a flight,
I remember that. Back then they called it racial profiling.
Yes.
They called it racial profiling, and it was a big deal.
The random checks, but it would
checks.
always be a brown person. It would, how long did you stay in New York after that?
Oh, I didn't leave for a couple years. I stayed in that apartment for about 3 months. The pile was on fire the whole time. It finally turned into a recovery mission instead of a rescue mission. That's what it had been. And then it was just the trucks bringing out the truckloads full of debris. Every 2 minutes, they went past my window, right underneath my window. I could look down into it and just see sprigs of wire and cement blocks. And, you know, your mind's going through, like, what's in there. So a lot of people left New York. I mean, like, up and left. In fact, we found an apartment in the West Village. I would never be able to find an apartment in the West Village. Are you kidding me? No, there was that much vacancy. New York people, some people got scared.
Absolutely.
And some people wouldn't visit. It took me a long time to visit.
It took me a long time to go back to New York.
And to this day, and you know, I struggle with saying this out loud publicly, I've not been down to Ground Zero.
I haven't either.
Me either.
I've not been.
And I don't think I'll ever go.
I can't, at least not yet. You don't think ever?
I don't think so. Simply because you remember how it used to be. You know, we used to go to New York as a teenager, and that would be one of the areas we would visit. I want New York to stay like that in my mind. Because the day that it happened, I'm telling you, I'm trying to be a brave producer, you know, in the booth. Everything that could have gone wrong that day did go wrong. And I can remember crying, but I didn't want my bosses to see me cry. You know, I'm the producer, I'm in charge. But how do you not cry?
How do you not cry?
You know, I'm tearing, but I'm telling you, when I left work that day and I got in my car, I couldn't hold it in. it was the worst professional experience of my life, and I couldn't express it at the time because I was in a professional setting. But as soon as I got off the job, I just couldn't hold it in. And it's the images over and over again. You see this happening. Is this really, how could this be happening? And I remember I had a TV on my desk that day. And of course, I need to listen to what they're saying, because at the time, you didn't get a lot from The Wire. We were getting everything from The Wire then. There was nothing coming down. So I'm trying to listen to this report, but I don't want to listen to this report. I don't want to see those images over and over again, because it's painful, it's devastating. You can't wrap your mind around something so horrible happening where you live.
And to this day, every year on the anniversary, the images in my head are those people who made that choice not to stay in the buildings and who jumped.
I mean, it had to be, imagine how bad it had to be that you made that choice.
That you made that choice. You said, we gotta wrap it up.
Okay. Well, may I just ask, are we done? Okay. Well, I was going to ask how, as a journalist, a young journalist, how do you think that day shaped your career going forward, shaped you as a journalist?
It shaped me because I wanted to know everything about everything about everything, you know, regardless of how painful it was. And that day was the pinnacle, especially because I'm in a setting where you're supposed to maintain your composure, and I could not do that. And every day since then, I've cried on September 11th because you don't get over it. You never get over it. And even when we were having this discussion, talking about doing something like this, something in the pit of my gut happened, because you don't get over it. Time moves on, you know, but you never forget.
How did it shape you?
I knew already I wanted to be a journalist. I'd known since I was 10 years old. It shaped my career because I knew that we, journalists, were the reason that people knew what was happening there. For those of us who weren't there and weren't there in the weeks and months after, this job was the reason people knew what was going on there and could get at least somewhat of a feel for it. And so I knew for sure then that that's what I wanted to do. So, you know, I've covered school shootings, I've covered disasters at state fairs, stages collapsing on people, and I've always carried that with me, is through us, people can get a sense of what is going on here, and it's important.
I feel like that happened for me too. I went back into news after, after that, I stopped being a flight attendant, because I remember, even though I was right there, I was glued to CNN just like everyone else, because you know why? In moments of trauma, information can bring you comfort.
Yes.
It doesn't change anything.
Yes.
You may not be able to do anything, but just having the information brings a sense of comfort. It brings some stability to the chaos.
Yeah, you almost feel like you have, in a weird way, a sense of control, because you're not just in the dark.
Correct.
And they say information is power,
Yes.
and it is.
Yeah.
And that's why I went back
want to
into
know
news.
more.
So, because I understand people need to know, even if it's just about a road closure on their street that doesn't affect anybody else, it affects that street.
Absolutely.
So,
And here we all are.
and here we are.
We're still here.
We're still here.
Happy to be here with you.
Happy to be here with both of you.
Me too.